Life Audio.
Welcome to the TMUS podcast, where we share how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together. Hey, everyone, we're Ted.
And Ashley Slater. What do you believe about conflict in marriage? There's a popular marriage myth that says healthy marriages are conflict-free marriages. Yet this couldn't be further from the truth. Listen in as we debunk this myth and share why couples in healthy marriages do experience conflict. So, Ted, I am very tired today.
Oh, why would that be?
Oh, my goodness. It was a weird night.
Tired? Everybody's tired. Why are you tired?
Okay, so we went to bed like around 9, right?
Which is quite early.
But then I woke up at like 2.
Like in the morning?
In the morning.
We're not talking 2 in the afternoon.
No, then I would not be tired.
Yeah, it's okay. So 2 in the morning you woke up.
I could not fall back asleep. I was wrestling with...
Me?
No. You were sound asleep.
Oh, yeah, you were not wrestling with
no.
me.
I was wrestling with things and having some very honest conversations with God. Could not fall back asleep.
Not physical things?
No.
Okay.
Like things that we have been experiencing.
Okay.
Like not you and I necessarily, like with each other, but just things our family has been experiencing with relationships outside of our family and circumstances and situations. So when it hit like after 3, I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to fall back asleep. So I went downstairs and watched a Hallmark mystery movie until about 5 something. Oof. And then I laid on the couch because I was like, I'm not going back up to bed and like tossing and turning. So I laid there and I think I fell asleep again, like a little after 7.
This is this morning.
Oh. And then I had weird dreams.
Oh man.
And
like
then
before or after you watched the
after the movie, but they
mystery.
didn't relate to the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I finally woke up again and I'm like, it's 8:30, which is really late for me.
Right. So then you had to get ready for church.
Yes. So I'm very tired
It's Sunday
today.
that we're recording this, by the way, in case you're wondering.
Very tired. So hopefully I can articulate ideas. So today we are actually continuing our Marriage Myth series. And we didn't dive into this last week, but did you know there's a process to debunking or disproving a myth?
Yes. Ask me.
You know the process? What's the process?
No, that's what the process is. Hey, Ted, is this true or not?
Well, that's one way to do it. But there are a couple of authors, John Cook and Stephen Lewandowski, who wrote a guide called The Debunking Handbook.
Ooh, I want to hear about the debunking handbook.
I'm going to admit that I didn't read the handbook in its entirety. I scanned it. It's very academic. And I think I needed a couple more shots of espresso or more graduate studies before I could, focus to read it in full. But I did note that the authors recommend 3 steps to debunking a myth. So I'm going to try to put...
Okay, this sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do my best to put them in layman's terms.
Okay.
So the first thing...
So I can understand.
Well, I needed to understand them, so I had to put them in layman's terms. Okay, so 1, lead with the truth. Introduce what's true or a core fact before you share what's false.
Okay. Sounds intriguing.
Okay. And number 2, and we're going to try to go through these as we debunk today's myth.
Okay.
2, give a clear warning. Before you mention the myth, let people know what you are about to share is untrue.
Whoa. Okay, this is fascinating. Okay.
Right? And 3, mind the gap. Debunking a myth leaves a gap in people's mind, which needs to be filled with truth.
Okay, this is going to be fun.
Okay, so as I said, I thought we would try these steps today as we debunk another popular marriage myth.
Okay.
So after a short break, we'll lead with the truth by talking about how couples in healthy marriages do experience conflict. So we are unpacking another marriage myth today, but before we get into the myth, let's lead with the truth. And the truth is that couples in healthy marriages do experience conflict. Yet, and here's step number 2 in debunking a myth, many couples enter and even live out marriage believing something that's untrue, and that myth is that to be a compatible couple in a healthy marriage means you don't experience conflict.
Okay, I think maybe an important part of this conversation will be to demystify what a conflict is.
Yeah.
And one way to do that is by defining it, the term, Just showing that conflict itself is not a scary thing that you should avoid because it's so bad.
Right.
Conflict is not so bad.
Right. And I think I'm going to address that, but, jump in.
All right.
If I'm not doing that well and add
I don't know if
to
I'll be
it.
jumping much because I too share your slight edge of sleepiness.
Even though you probably got more hours
Much more
than I
than
did.
you did last night.
Okay, so here's the thing. All of us are married to imperfect individuals. We are an imperfect individual, married to an imperfect individual.
Yeah.
And where there's a relationship that includes an authentic bringing of ourselves to the table where we don't sweep issues under the rug, conflict will happen. It's inevitable.
Right. Even if only one party has got issues and the other person is like Jesus, conflict is still going to arise, even if one of the two parties is perfectly Jesus.
This is true. Right. Jesus just knew how to respond to conflict in a perfect way. And we don't always.
Just fine. Yeah.
Right. Well, okay. So let's go to scripture.
I like it.
James 4.
How about James?
Yes. James 4, 1-2 says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel." What I think is interesting is James doesn't question whether his readers will or will not experience conflict. Instead, he assumes that they do and basically asks the rhetorical question of what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Because then he just goes on to answer why, which is essentially selfishness or our need to have things our own way. It's our natural inclination to think of me first and foremost.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in a way, you kind of have to think of yourself first so that your body survives, so that you can serve other people. But it can go too far. You can think of yourself first and only.
Yes. What is it? Is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I mean, there are some needs you have to think of so that you don't die.
Well, yeah. Food, water, shelter, air.
Yeah, but there's different levels to that. So basically, it's not about whether a healthy marriage includes conflict or not. It's about how a couple within that marriage approaches and handles the conflict.
Fascinating.
So,
yep.
If the truth is that couples in a healthy marriage do experience conflict, how can we choose to approach or handle it? And I have a couple suggestions.
I want to hear them.
So the first one we have talked about on the podcast before, but I think it bears repeating. And that is, one, we can choose to approach conflict as part of our marriage adventure.
And whenever you say adventure, I think of, who is it, Bilbo Baggins? Are you going to quote from Bilbo? Or?
I am. I always go back to The Hobbit and Bilbo Baggins.
And who doesn't love that story? The adventure of the Hobbit doing his hobbity thing, and then afterwards the Lord of the Rings doing their Lord of the Ring things.
Right. And okay, so
that's adventurous conflict.
Right. Well, when Gandalf brings up the idea of adventure to Bilbo, Bilbo responds that he has no use for adventures and that they are nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things that make you late for dinner.
We kind of all believe the same thing, don't we?
Right. Well, although here's the thing. I think that in our current society or culture, we hear adventure and we think, oh, I want to go on an adventure.
Adventure's out there. Let's go.
Exactly.
Put on
but
your shoes. We're out of here.
Is always fun and always exciting and always something that can and should be pursued. But Bilbo understood something that I think we often forget, which is adventures aren't simply exciting, thrill-seeking adventures. I mean, if we go to Merriam-Webster, it says that adventures at their core are an undertaking usually involving danger and unknown risks. So they are often, as Bilbo labeled them, disturbing and most definitely uncomfortable.
So this is Merriam-Webster
Dictionary.
Not our neighbor. Okay.
We don't have a neighbor named Merriam-Webster.
Excuse me, Mr. Webster. I got a question for you.
You just know that I'm tired. You're keeping me on my toes.
Messing with you.
So I think that, because conflict is uncomfortable.
Yes.
And there is this marriage myth that causes many couples to believe that healthy marriages
shouldn't be in conflict.
Right. I think that we often view it as a threat. I mean, I used to avoid it and sweep it under the rug, and I didn't know how to address it in a healthy way. But over the years, I've come to change my perspective and view it as more of an adventure. And here's the thing. I mean, adventures challenge and stretch us in ways that force us to change. Like Bilbo was not the same hobbit when he came home
When he went there and back again?
Exactly. Nicely played there. Yeah. He was not the same hobbit. You know, he changed. I mean, he faced hard things, but he kept persevering.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when we view conflict in marriage as an adventure, we're acknowledging that it can feel like a dangerous and risky undertaking, but it can also bring about our good.
Absolutely.
You know, when we choose to run from it, we don't get the opportunity to change.
And that's a big part of life. I mean, certainly none of us wants to be like we were when we were, 15, as far as maturity and selflessness and serving others and thinking about our role in this world and so on. So, yeah, we've got to change. And adventure and conflict is one big way that forces us to.
Yeah. I mean, our pastor in today's sermon was even talking about how we should always be changing because we should always be improving and growing to be more like Jesus.
Right. Yep. And then in 10 years from now, we'll look back and we'll think, I'm glad I improved.
Right. And so I think that if we choose to approach conflict as an adventure and tackle it in a healthy, God-honoring, and mutually beneficial way, it can actually serve to strengthen, not destroy our marriage, both now and long term.
And if you and I are both up for the adventure, understanding the context in our marriage, there will be adventure will come.
Yes. And it will be uncomfortable, but I think we've been married long enough because we've been married 22 years. Is that
Something
right?
Like that, yeah.
Yeah. I think we have learned that we always get to the other side of conflict and we're better because we took the adventure.
And we didn't sweep it under the rug and it won't be there like in a week.
Right.
Did my voice just change? I don't like sweeping things under the rug because it'll be there in a week. It'll be there in a month. It'll be there.
Right. It
and
will.
That's not a good feeling.
It's not healthy.
No.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you are at a place in your marriage where you don't even know how to start approaching conflict in a healthy, God-honoring, and mutually beneficial way, or maybe you have a spouse who avoids it, consider finding a Christian marriage counselor who can help you and your spouse learn how to navigate conflict well. Right. I think it's wise to bring in help when you can't figure something out on your own.
Absolutely. Of course. Seeking wise counsel is, the Bible tells us to do that.
Yes.
Don't be a dummy. Seek wise counsel,
Right. Okay. So number 2.
Wait, what was number 1?
Number 1 was to choose to approach conflict as part of our marriage adventure.
Okay. And then number 2 now.
Number 2 is we can choose to humble ourselves before God and our spouse. So if we keep reading in James 4, we come to verse 6, which says, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And if we keep reading some more, James says in verse 10, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. So humility matters. I mean, he brings this up, humility twice up after he says, what causes quarrels among you? And late British theologian John R.W. Stout once said, pride is your greatest enemy, humility is your greatest friend. And I think that's true in our relationship with God and with each other.
So those listening may be wondering why you said late British theologian. We invited him over for dinner the other day. He did not show up.
That's because he died in like 2011.
Oh, he's very late. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, humility is not just a thing that you grasp at the time, but it's kind of a lifestyle. Well, it's got to be. I mean, you just got to walk in humility.
And it's another thing that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to humble ourselves. It means saying, hey, maybe I was wrong in this area.
It can be uncomfortable, but it can also be a release, because if I humble myself and you say, you're right, I mean, okay, so I humbled myself, but you affirmed my self-humiliation, so that's not so uncomfortable. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think humility starts with each of us individually humbling ourselves before God when we have conflict with each other and asking him to show us our hearts in the situation and what we can apologize for, where we went wrong, and how we can grow and change. I don't know how many times I've been upset at you, and I have talked to God about it.
How many times you've been upset at you, period?
Well, no. No, it's not a period. It's a comma. Upset at you.
Three
and gone
times?
to God about it. And he's been like, Ashley, I think you need to apologize for this. And I've been like, shoot, why can't you just tell Ted to apologize? So.
Well, humility at its simplest is us saying, oh, nah, I was wrong. God, you're right. It's acknowledging truth.
Right.
That's humility, is just yes, God.
Yeah. And so in those instances when he's been like, Ashley, I think you need to apologize to this and humble yourself. Then I come to you, and instead of waiting, for you to apologize. I mean, sometimes you apologize first. It depends. It depends on the situation.
Right.
But what I'm saying is usually when I take a conflict that we're having to God, he shows me how I can humble myself and do better.
Yeah.
So I think,
and then maybe your step in humility triggers something in me. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to do this too, don't I? Right.
Yeah. So I think after we go to God and have an honest conversation with him and, are open to, what the Holy Spirit wants to say and to feeling convicted, then we go to our spouse and we take those things and we humble ourselves and take ownership, which I think is hard. I think it's much easier to want to point fingers and not accept responsibility, at least in the beginning, especially if we're not used to addressing conflict. I think it becomes easier with time.
But it's the best way to deal with conflict, right? Conflict being something that arises when we're either one or both of us are being a little bit overly selfish.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's, what is it, Proverbs? I don't know the exact verse. Pride comes before the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all right. Do you have anything you want to add before I recap?
Oh, I've got so much. But you can recap.
Okay. So to recap, couples in healthy marriages do experience conflict. It's not about whether it will happen. It's about how we handle it when it does happen. And so 2 suggestions for when we face conflict as couples are: 1, we can choose to approach conflict as part of our marriage adventure. And 2, we can choose to humble ourselves before God and our spouse. So we're going to take one more break. And when we return, we'll be back with this week's Us Time Challenge. For this week, our Us Time Challenge, I think it would be really interesting if couples went and searched conflict styles. Like there are 5.
Conflict styles?
Yeah, there are 5 primary ones. We're not going to get into them here. What? I think it's competing, collaborating, compromising, accommodating, and avoiding.
These are conflict
styles. Ways.
Approaching styles or conflict resolution styles?
No, they're ways that people might approach conflict.
Oh.
Or try to handle conflict.
Okay. Oh, you feel a conflict, and this is how people might behave or respond or react to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I definitely used to have an avoiding conflict style.
Huh.
So I think it would be really interesting for those listening, and maybe we can do this too, to go, read about those and then reflect together on which ones you and your spouse best fit, and then have a conversation about maybe how that's hurting or helping your relationship. Just kind of explore that together.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm reminded of the 5 love languages and how understanding your primary love languages helps in your relationship. So understanding your primary conflict style or your conflict language.
Right. There you go. Well, thanks for joining us on the Team Us podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast, and we'd love to have you leave a review over at Apple Podcasts. We're looking forward to next time as we keep talking about how grace, commitment, and cooperation can help couples live the everyday moments of marriage together.
Team Us with Ted and Ashley Slater is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review the podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.
What do you do when the world around you is falling apart? It's amazing to me how many people are breathing air. They're going about their business and doing the things you're supposed to do. But if you really ask them, they know that on the inside, they are spiritually and emotionally and relationally dead. If we're not careful, all of us can experience that death. When what we need to do, even as the world around us is falling apart, we need to learn how to march when it would be easier to stay where we are and die. Join me each week on the March or Die Show as we discuss that and so much more.